It's not about one individual or project, but it's about advancing creative ways to promote development in this city. It's no more complicated than that. I would like to lastly say that on behalf of my commission members, we endorse it. It's going to make our jobs a lot easier because when we get a lot of the zoning codes does not allow for a lot of the uses to be in certain parts of the city. And those get complicated and emotions come to play, and we're just trying to do the best thing that we can in this community. So having said that, I'll turn it over to Joyce. Thank you.
All right, Director.
Thank you very much. We really feel that this is an opportunity to think about our future, to think about the city. We are really excited to share with you this slide deck, which is quite hefty and technical, and I would like to turn it over to the Chief Zoning Administrator, Shannon Leonard, in order to get us started. Thank you.
All right, just a reminder for those who are listening, as we go through this process, after the presentation, we'll open it up for public comment for those to make comment, and you sign up with our clerk here, Ms. Inez, and we'll have you come up. You'll get 2 minutes to make public comment for us to consider, and then we'll go into questions from the body regarding the presentation presented, all right? And just to the members, we'll get to the presentation, and then we'll go to questions, and so that way Mrs. Leonard can continue to flow through the presentation without interruption. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Shannon Leonard, Chief Zoning Administrator. So this is a pretty hefty PowerPoint, as the director had stated, but it's a culmination of 6 years of working with a consultant in the community to really bring this code in front of you, and just a new way to do zoning in the city of Cleveland. So when we think about our goals as a city, as a council, as everyone, we really think about a city that's walkable, accessible, connected, sustainable, safe, healthy, equitable, and vibrant. And sometimes we wonder, how do we get there? Some of those sustainable neighborhoods include things like community gardening. We have an aging population. We want it to be senior friendly. We want convenient public transportation. We want clear air and clean water. We want green housing on vacant lots. We want healthy homes and schools all across the city. We need sustainable jobs. You want pedestrian and bicycle connections that help make us a healthier city overall. We want access to human and social services, and most folks want public safety. When we think about a quality of life in the city of Cleveland, these two pictures here represent two areas in the city of Cleveland. On the left side of the screen, even though it looks like somewhere maybe in the rural Alabama, the exurbs of the city of Cleveland, this is actually in the Forgotten Triangle area of the Kinsman neighborhood, where it's strewn with vacant lots and not many amenities. On the right side of the screen, you see somewhere on the near west side in Ohio City, where there's outdoor dining, retail, access to groceries, things of that nature. So what does that have to do with zoning? When you look at this map right now, it's blank, but when we think about the quality of life that we want to have in our city, how we manage our land and how we regulate our land dictates where resources and opportunities can go. So for instance, for a good sustainable neighborhood, we know we need a variety of housing types, not just in typology of single family, multifamily, but also in housing price points. So do we have affordable housing? Do we have middle class housing? Do we have, luxury housing? All of those things help make a neighborhood more vibrant. The other thing we need is access within walking distance to help our neighborhoods become more healthier and prosper, is access to resources. So whether that's social services, grocery stores, or daycares, that's filled in by whether we have retail options in our neighborhood, as you see highlighted here in pink. Other options is that we need places to work and to create. So we need jobs in our neighborhoods, jobs within close proximity to our neighborhoods, so that our folks and our residents can get to work and work nearby and thrive in their communities and help those communities grow over time. We also need places to, garden or to recreate. We need parks and places and amenities for our children to grow and play. So when we think about all of these things, planning encompasses a lot of things. You can have a lot of plans, but if you don't have the proper zoning code in place or the proper regulations in place, it sometimes becomes very hard to implement those plans. So planning has engagement, advocacy, and then regulation, and zoning falls in that regulation bin. So our current zoning code, as you know, is really organized around use. So what can you do in this triangle, this inverted triangle, is the most restricted up to the least restricted. So you can have a single family in a two family or in a retail district, but you generally can't have retail down in a single family or two family district, really separating uses. We also regulate around height, so anywhere from 35 feet to 900 feet. Generally, most of the city is ranged somewhere between 35 feet and 115 feet, and as you can imagine, that's quite broad. And then area districts regulate how much residential you can have on any given parcel of land, as well as minimum lot sizes, such as a single-family home needs to be on a 4,800 square foot lot, or a two-family needs to be on a 6,000 square foot lot. We also have other regulations as it relates to development standards, such as setback regulations. As you all know, I come before this board quite often to add map setbacks because the context doesn't fit within the development. This is a very tedious, showing you the regulations are really need an expert or zoning technical expert to be able to dive into what this really means. Furthermore, when we think about the zoning code today, on the bottom hand of the screen, you see Lorraine Avenue, which was built before the institution of our zoning code came into place. This was the historic development pattern that was really around the streetcar network, making sure that residents could get nearby to their local amenities and local needs. Whereas on the top-hand side of the screen, this was after the 1949 code went through, and really just shows you the suburban nature of how our zoning code requires land to be used and managed. As you can see, there's quite a bit of impermeable surfaces, and most of the institutions on Clark are corporate chains, which that money goes back into the corporate coffers rather into the local community. The other thing to think about is that our zoning code really doesn't take context into consideration when regulating for land, and so it's highly unpredictable, which often leads to many trips to the Board of Zoning Appeals. A good example here is, though you see Cam's Corners or in Ohio City where it's zoned local retail, so is the area of Buckeye Plaza, but also the Burger King site at Detroit and Lake. And so this really requires us to really get that context out of our design review bodies, which can be quite discretionary in times, and sometimes quite inequitable. So it's really dependent on design review and city planning to advocate for good form. And so, furthermore, it requires more parking than allowable floor area for buildings. So in 1949 and in the 70s, we passed parking that generally requires more parking square footage than what is allowed to be in a building. And what this has led to is, if you look on the left-hand side of the screen, are these strip centers all across our city where you go, you park, you go into the store, and then you leave. It's not in terms of trying to be equitable and healthy. It contributes to the air pollution in our communities. And then there is no pedestrian. It's really dangerous for pedestrians to walk along here. So what we've noticed is single-use zoning plus highway construction plus the auto growth has led to urban sprawl all across our city as well as other cities in the country. So kind of just moving on to the differences between our code and the form-based code is the current code really separates uses, which mandates lots of driving. It mandates people having access to a vehicle to get to places such as their doctor's appointments or their jobs, things of that nature. Whereas the form-based code and everything that we've done here in the zoning section, since I've been here at least, is really trying to go back to a mix of uses. So we encourage walkability, which we know that aids into the health of our populations. So when we have the outcomes, just to kind of drive home this point one last time, is when you look at the redlining map on the left and you compare it to the zoning map as well as our racial demographic map, you can see the effects of our zoning plus the redlining maps and how that has caused the separation of people throughout the city of Cleveland. So what are the alternatives to what we currently have, zoning code? We have the variance process, which means if you don't meet the zoning code in some way, you go to the Board of Zoning Appeals and you seek a variance for the use or an area development standard. We also have planned unit development. So the Battery Park area in Detroit Shoreway was a planned unit development. The Mill Creek neighborhood down in the southeast side was a planned unit development. And that can be a really restrictive process if those areas have vacant land nearby and need to grow. It's an extremely tedious process. There's also the overlay districts. We've used urban form overlay and pedestrian retail overlay to get, basically form-based code light prior to this project. We've added new zoning districts. And then over time, since 1929, we've been revising the code, so for almost over 100 years, 96 years. So when we think about the form-based code, it's quite a foreign concept to many people, but in reality, it's just a different way to organize our zoning code. Whereas the Euclidean or conventional zoning code really organizes around use. So when you're going through the code, somebody calls, says, hey, can I do archery here? You have to go back each district to find whether it's permitted or not. And then with the form-based code, it's less around use and more around form. So how do those building typologies, fit within the public realm, but also the private realm? So when we think about the form and how does that, we take a vision from the neighborhood, from the residents, from the community, really put that onto paper, map it out, and we're really looking at things going block by block, street by street, determining not only what do the residents want, but what does the neighborhood look like. So what are the height of the buildings on the streets? Are they 3 stories, 4 stories, 6 stories? What is the form? Are there a lot of windows, a lot of doors, a lot of transparency? How do those buildings sit along the public right-of-way? Are there large sidewalks? Are there small sidewalks? Is there outdoor dining available? And then we also still regulate for use. So you don't want to have a glue factory next to residents or somebody painting cars near residents. Those things are still regulated for. They're just not the predominantly organizing factor of the code. So when we think about the implementation of this code, as I had stated, it's been a long time. We've been really in the thick of this since 2018, 2019. We've had 26 departmental internal reviews, meaning the people that touch this code every day, a building permit, have reviewed this code, whether that's the urban forester, whether that's the Department of Building and Housing survey, construction and engineering. All of the departments, various departments that touch this code have reviewed it and provided feedback. We had external reviews, so we reached out to people out in the field that are actually professional developers and architects that do this type of development and really got their feedback, making sure that these regulations not only were possible, but also were going towards the direction of the goals of this code. And we consolidated all of those comments. And then we had a formal law review. Todd here did the formal review. He's had extensive expertise in form-based codes across the state and country. So as you know, we've been here several times for contract extensions with the Code Studio. And then back in May 29th of last year, we did a public draft release. On June 9th, we held a form-based code workshop that was attended by over 100 professionals from the American Institute of Architects, Urban Land Institute, attorneys, American Planning Association, and then that afternoon it was open to the public, and it was also filmed on TV 20. We had a ton of public feedback from the public release as well as that workshop. And then there was a lot of concern in our Huff neighborhoods and our Detroit Shoreway Cadell, where the earliest adaptations of the public participation and visioning processes occurred that I'll walk through. Went back out into the community and really went through these maps and really helped the community understand and listen to them about their needs. Obviously, since this first started in 2019, there's been significant development changes in the Detroit Shoreway Cadell area as well as the Huff neighborhood. And so working with the residents and the community members as well as businesses, in the fall of 2023, we went to the New Day in Huff, as well as 2 additional Huff meetings. And then for the Detroit Shoreway Cadell area, we had 2 meetings and then an additional meeting in spring of 2024, so earlier this year. And we actually sent out over 500 door knockers. So our interns and Xavier went out and knocked on door to door in the Detroit Shoreway Cadell area, letting people know, hey, we're having a meeting about the form-based code. We also sent a postcard out to the same addresses that were affected by these meetings that we are here today. And that was a fairly good turnout at those meetings as well. And then we moved on to the formal presentation at Planning Commission in March. And so this really just kind of walking through the public engagement and process. We contracted Code Studio in July 2019. In October 2019, there was a week-long visioning charrette with the Detroit Shoreway. So Berkshire Hathaway opened their doors all week, all day from 8 a.m., I believe, until about 9 p.m. at night so that people could come in, do lunch and learns, participate, and then there was an evening visioning process and mapping that occurred. Then in fall 2019, early 2020, there was meetings with the Burton Bell Carr neighbor organization as well as Fairfax as it relates to the Opportunity Corridor maps that you'll see here today. And then we had COVID-19 in March 2020. And so we really had to change the progress of this, but when we did the Huff community engagement, those really was a great turnout by the youth as well as the community members around. That went over Zoom. There was also a Freedom Zone performance as it relates to how does redlining and zoning work that was really put on in the Huff neighborhood. And again, we followed through with those. There were internal revisions. Then we had the public draft available, as I just spoke about, and then the various community meetings that I attended, as well as my colleagues in the Huff neighborhood, as well as the Detroit Shoreway and Cadell neighborhood. So very extensive public engagement as it relates to this project and making sure that neighbors were involved and participated and were informed. So when we talk about the path to a new code, this really started back in probably 2015, and even before that when we started adding the overlay districts as in the urban form overlay. There was a best practices in zoning symposium by Urban Land Institute that really got this going. And ever since, there's been several updates to the code since then, piecemeal. But the goal was really to have an easy to read zoning code that was accessible not only to architects and developers, but also the everyday resident as well as administrators. And then we wanted to create a transparent and predictable administrative process. So when we think about the form-based code objectives, we're really looking at resident-centered neighborhoods, making sure that our residents know what's coming. The goal really is to have this process in which there's a visioning in the beginning of the process, then we codify for not only the context of the street, but also the vision of the neighbors. So really taking both of those in account, which has been used throughout the years with our design review process. We wanted a code that was simple and accessible, and then we wanted efficiency at City Hall. A good example of this is a single-family home recently came through last fall, and it wasn't until 2 weeks ago that they were finally approved at the Board of Zoning Appeals. And so a single-family home, when we're trying to refill our neighborhoods with families, traditional families, taking almost over a year to get all the permits for the city is a little bit crazy in most people's eyes. So we'll move on to the meat and potatoes of this code. This is the technical aspects of it in terms of what you'll see once the code inserts for the form-based code and the chapters and where it'll go within the current code. So the current code lives under the American legal system, or in this book under Part 3B, which is Chapter 325 to 359. This will now take up Title 7A under form-based code, Chapter 3001 to 3007. And this code doesn't fully replace this existing code. They kind of live in tandem together. And then the areas that this code doesn't address, the current zoning code will govern. So for specific uses such as short-term rentals, small box retail, things of that nature, they'll revert. Signs will revert back to the current zoning code. So what you'll see on the first chapter, 3001, is the introductory provisions. It talks about the intent, purpose, authority, and application, and it establishes these 23 districts that fall under about 7 different districts. So the house scale through the urban innovation zone. And so the zoning districts, what you'll see is on every first page of a zoning district under 3002 is that you'll see the zoning district, you'll get some imagery of what this district could look like, as well as kind of a snapshot and intent of the district. And then right away, you're gonna see a summary of allowed uses. So is it permitted? Is it permitted with conditions? Is it conditional? Or is it simply not permitted? Really making it easy for you to understand what is allowed to be in that district. And then each of these these other districts, like residential, household living, what exactly does that mean? We'll find that in the other 3003. Additionally, under each of these districts, you'll see these 2 pages on every page representing the site. So what is the site of that project? What are the development standards regarding those site regulations? So for instance, how many dwelling units can you have per site in a house district? That's a house 4 district, so you can have 4 dwelling units. And then you also look at the building. So that's talking about the building envelope, the massing, the windows, the story height, things of that nature. And then each of these are broken down further, and we'll walk through those. And then really what's really great about this page here is an applicability. So it's kind of like an a la carte. When you come to the city of Cleveland and you pull a permit, if you're doing new construction, these are all of the things that you need to include in your package, in your application, and make sure that those things are in the application to complete the application so that administrators can review and apply the code properly. If you're doing just a change of use, maybe you don't need all of the things that are required under the zoning code, but you need the key things that will affect that change of use within that neighborhood. So we'll walk through each of these, the rules of interpretation. This is the meat and potatoes of this code. This is basically everything that you saw on these pages here, and I'm just going to walk through what each of those means and why those are important. So the first foremost thing is this code is a little bit different than our current code in that it regulates, you'll see the word site. Site can be one parcel or it can be multiple parcels making a site as long as there's some type of primary frontage or access easement to parcels that do not directly front a site, front a primary street. And this is also very important as it relates to some flexibility around this code. And what I mean by that is if you think about Chester, between East 55th and East 90th, north of Chester, those parcels cannot have a Chester address, but they're immediately adjacent on one side to Chester, which is quite a large street that looks like a boulevard to many people, but it's also next to historic homes in the Huff neighborhood that were built in the 90s that are suburban style. And so what this allows is that when there are projects that come through that are fronting Chester that are more residential but also more office or retail in nature, they can front Chester without necessarily having a Chester address. So this gives a little bit more flexibility to bring that retail or that more commercial nature of a business off of the residential to the north. The next thing is site width, and that's really the length of the primary boundary line of a site. And so what that really requires is that when you think about it is you see front access here. This means that if you have a driveway from the front of your property, then you need at least a 25-foot wide lot. Rather than looking at the area of a lot like our current code, the site width is really what matters, determining making sure that you can get drive access on. Or in this case, if you come from the side or rear access, you need a 20-foot wide width to at least to be able to accommodate that. The next thing is amenity. This is something that our current code does not regulate for, but is regulated completely through our design review and city planning and landmarks processes. It's where we were requiring amenity space, whether that's private amenity space or private public amenity space on a specific project. So for new construction, we're requiring 10% in a variety of almost all of the districts outside of the house scale, neighborhood scale, to require this outdoor amenity space. So you get a little bit of a bonus if it's a public-private space versus just solely for your tenants on a private space. The next thing is streetscape. This streetscape here is really important, how we engage the street from the private property to the public property and how those sidewalks and furniture zones look. And so this code requires outside of the house scale and neighborhood scale, those districts are required to maintain the contacts if there's infill development so you don't have wonky sidewalks. But in this case, in all the other districts, there's going to be a streetscape requirement. We worked with the urban forestry folks and the Urban Tree Commission to really beef up the tree canopy and to really regulate how trees work and the stormwater runoff and things of that nature in our streetscape and in our public areas throughout the city in this code. And the urban forester, Jennifer Kipp, is here to answer any of those questions if you have any of those. The next thing is setbacks. Setbacks are regulated in all zoning codes generally, and so this is how far off the right-of-way you have to be. So your primary street in most of these districts that are house scale, neighborhood scale, is either that established setback or there's the option of a 10 feet minimum or 20-foot maximum. And then the side street yard requires 3 feet, and then the rear setback is dependent on how tall a building is. This code also is new in that we require transitions between our commercial areas and the residential areas, or commercial corridors. And in this case, what it's saying that is when you're buffering or adjacent to a district of lower intensity, you're going to need at least a 10-foot buffer on the ground, and then anything over 2.5 stories is going to require a 10-foot. So right now we reward development that pushes height backwards away from the right-of-way. So for instance, this came up with the asphalt plant. If you can go up 60 feet and then go up 90 feet, as long as you keep pushing back closer to the residential behind you. In this case, we're saying no, push that height up towards the major corridors and away from the residential so it's not as overbearing. And then the next section is the street build-out under the site, and that's really how much of the building envelope that needs to be up towards the primary right-of-way or on the side street. And then massing, when you think about massing, that's like the building envelope. So if you see this cube here, you can see that the first thing we're talking about is height. How tall is that building? So instead of looking at everything from 35 feet to 60 feet, which is quite a jump, that's about 3 stories up to 6 stories, we're saying, hey, in our house scale districts, in our neighborhood districts, you can't be more than 32 feet, and then go on upwards as such. So it's based on stories, or 2.5 stories in a house scale district. The next is story height. This is important when we think about our ground floors and creating visual interest along the street and quality. One thing that comes up a lot is affordable housing all looks the same. It's cookie cutter. By requiring some of these higher ground stories, you're creating more visual interest and more quality for the residents that live there. And so this is saying there's a 12-foot first story minimum. And then also you can go up to 5-story, and then along those, that first story, you need to have active uses. Active uses, glazing and doors and things of that nature, as you see here, requiring a variety of windows and door fronts is really putting those eyes on the street. That creates public safety for people that want to walk through the neighborhood at all times of the day, but also for tenants in these buildings, they can see in and out, see what's going on to make sure that their shops are safe as well. So the next section is 3003. This is the use regulations. This still regulates for use. It's just not the main organizing factor. There's general provisions, so that goes through the use categories, principal uses, accessory uses, and then an administrative responsibility. There's a permitted use table with additional use standards. There's modern day language used. There's a robust list of uses within each of those categories. And then we really regulate for the accessory uses and structures, so our current code doesn't allow for things like accessory dwelling units or in-law suites without requiring those to be whole extra units. This code allows for that. And then there's also more focus on home-based businesses, so more low barrier to entry, personal service office, so really looking at the impact on a residential street versus the type. And so this code breaks down all of the uses on one page in 3003.2.2. As you can see, so if you say, hey, can I have a doggy daycare in a residential district, you could go here and look and see if it's permitted or is it permitted with conditions. The other thing that we did is with the additional use standards, we met with our urban food systems and the urban agriculture folks during the process of this public engagement and fix this so that that people could still serve farm stands, between dusk and 8 a.m. So making sure that that wasn't too restrictive for those in our community that choose to do community gardening. And then the next section is 3004. This is the development standards. So this really talks about access, parking, where can you park, screening, walls, fences, planting, and outdoor lighting. Those are things that are generally enforced through our City Planning Commission and Landmarks Commissions, but under this code, it is being required for all new construction. So we really codified those design review desires that were adopted by the city into regulations. So in this code, we look at parking and parking access. So there is no minimum parking requirements in these pilot geographies, but we do regulate where you park and how you park, meaning that generally speaking, you need to be in the rear of buildings and making sure that those are landscaped and screening appropriately. We also require a certain amount of bicycle parking to make sure that we're getting our city ready to have multiple avenues of mobility. Again, we look at landscaping and screening, so this is not too different from our current code. It just beefs up the amount of landscaping and trees and things of that nature that we need within our parking lots and making sure that we screen those appropriately. And again, this just kind of walks through that. We can dive into that if you're really interested in that type of screening. We can go through each set if you'd like. And then outdoor lighting is really making sure that our streets and our parking lots and throughout the neighborhoods is well lit, but does not bleed over into neighboring properties. So this section is 3005. It talks about the administration of this code. And these will be the bigger differences that you'll see in this process versus under the current process. The current zoning code has no directions on administration other than what needs to be enforced by our chief building official. And so in this case, we'll have a pre-application conference with the zoning administrator and the neighborhood planner. You'll have up to 5 units or 5,000 square feet. We'll do a review of the application, make sure the application is complete. Once it's complete, we'll have 10 days to complete it and approve it or deny it based on the directions in 3005.1.2. If it's 6 units or 5,000 square feet plus, you'll go to what's known as a technical review committee after you have a complete application. And within 20 days, the technical review committee must approve or deny. This technical review committee is made up of all of the technical people within the city that has to touch an application as it relates to the administrative, applying the rules and regulations to an application. If it's 6 to 20 units and 5,000 square feet to 20,000 square feet, once it goes through technical review committee and it's approved, they can go on and file for their other city permits. Anything that's 20 units or 20,000 square feet or more has to go through city planning or commission for a public hearing after they get approval at the technical review committee. And so that means that they've met all of the technical aspects of the various codes, not just in the zoning code, but also sidewalks, water, fire, all of those necessary items. So this technical review committee is made up of mostly all the people from building and housing, as well as construction engineering, survey, fire, and then we have the neighborhood planner, utilities, and then community development, economic development, law, and sustainability would all be involved, and public safety would be on some of those projects that really require, but not every project is going to require somebody from each of those departments. Something like helping with financing would contribute to why they would need to be at these meetings to make sure all of their regulations and needs are being met as well. And then every single, as in every code throughout the city, the Board of Zoning Appeals ends up being the appeal body to anything that is denied. Somebody can appeal that through that because that's their last stop shop. It's a quasi-judicial meeting before they go to court. It's part of the due process. And then also in this code, our current code has over 23 conditional uses, but there's not a lot of instructions on how that works, or it's not clear throughout. This code really defines how conditional uses and written interpretations work in this zoning code. So that's the meat and potatoes before we get going on these maps for each of the 4 geographies that are here. So I'll move forward. Let me just take a sip.
Again, the members, if you have any questions, just jot them down so that way when we finish the presentation, we can come back to those questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So why do we pick these 3 geographies? It's 4 maps, but 3 geographies. Was the Detroit Shoreway, Cadell area, the Job Corps job zone, and the New Economy Fairfax area, and then the Huff neighborhood. Was when we started this project and continue, is a limited budget, and we wanted to pick areas that were adjacent to other investments. So when you think about the Detroit Shoreway Cadell, there had been a lot of improvements with the Battery Park PUD, as well as since the Edgewater Park. Opportunity Corridor, as you know, is a new corridor, so it was open for development. And then Huff, there had been a lot of investments going into League Park and other places that was really starting to spur new investment nearby. And why is this important? Because once this was passed, and had it passed, prior to the shutdown of the world with the pandemic, we would have started seeing building permit applications coming in and could apply this code as a pilot. And we also want an area with diverse building typologies and uses. So obviously, single family and multifamily and residential streets needs different zoning tools than mixed-use buildings on busy thoroughfares or even manufacturing facilities that surround our neighborhoods. So the first map we're going to walk through is the Detroit Shoreway and Cadell pilot area. This went through extensive, not only in the beginning in 2019 with the week-long charrette, but also for the past year and a half, we've gone back and forth with the community as well as Councilwoman Spencer and had several different meetings with her residents as well as other organizations. So the first section is the house scale 4. What the 4 represents here is a maximum of 4 dwelling units are permitted per site here. So when we think about the 4, house 4, that doesn't mean that 4 units have to go on every lot. They have to fit within that building envelope and that massing that we talked about as it relates to the setbacks. But you could also have single family, maybe you could have an accessory dwelling unit, maybe it's a duplex, maybe it's a triplex, and the proposal here is no more than 2.5 stories. The current height district in this area is allowed 35 feet, so you could go well above the 2.5 stories. So there has been a lot of conversation around why did you decide to change this 2-family to 4 units? And really it comes down to housing affordability and making sure that the neighborhood, we've reduced the nonconformities in the neighborhood. And I'm going to kind of walk through what the current requirements are under the 2-family. So with our current zoning code, the minimum lot width for a single-family dwelling unit is 40 feet, whereas for a 2-family dwelling unit, you need 50 feet width. The minimum lot area for a single-family dwelling unit is 4,800 square feet, whereas a 2-family is 6,000 square feet, and a minimum dwelling unit size across the city is 950 square feet. And so why is this important? When we look in this neighborhood that is zoned 2-family currently, that we're proposing 4 units in this area of the Cadell neighborhood, you have 138 single-family units. You have 68 units that are more than 2-family dwelling units. You have 12 vacant lots. And then you have a variety of others that's 4+ units that make up the area where we have also some 16 plexes. And then the minimum lot width, this is important because this is the amount of any type of infill housing or rehab that comes through the city is automatically at a disadvantage and needs some type of variance on the process. So for the minimum lot width for a single family, we have 20% of non-conforming units as is. And for anything that's 2-family dwelling units in this area, 100% are already non-conforming. And then as it relates to minimum lot area in this area for single-family dwelling units, which requires 4,800 square feet, 52% of the units are non-conforming, whereas 88% of all 2-family dwelling unit parcels are non-conforming in this area. And so when we think about this, there's 138 units in this pilot area that we've chosen to be H4. That's designated, it's ranked as a C or lower. So what does a C mean when we talk about the property survey that was done by the city, Department of Building and Housing, and the Western Reserve Land Conservancy? Is a C is a fair. So you have what you see on these images here is maybe some cracking or the brick or wood, maybe there's major painting required, maybe you have deteriorated cornices or concrete or foundation, cracked windows or stairs. And so this is really important because our current code has a non-conforming clause, which says that if more than 50% is destroyed by acts of God or whatever cause, you cannot rebuild. And what we see here a lot of times is that when you have traditional mortgage homeowners come in and they want to buy a home, and the home is already in a non-conforming state, they're unable to obtain traditional mortgages or financing. And we know that this results in more real estate investment from cash transfers as well as non-residents. And then we've also found in several neighborhoods that they have more difficulty insuring the home. So how can the form-based code help with this? It respects both the existing and the desired development patterns. It promotes the adaptive reuse and rehab of these homes. It reduces the nonconformities. It streamlines the regulatory process by removing barriers for context-sensitive investment and avoids costly administrative meetings or Board of Zoning appeals. It expands access to home ownership by permitting accessory dwelling units, cottage courts, cluster developments, multi-generational housing, tiny homes, and it does not regulate the minimum lot size unless you have minimum lot width as it relates to driveway width. So with the H4, again, this is 2.5 stories. So this is a great example of a project that was not in a pilot area, but is showing you what a 4-dwelling unit within the context of our existing Cleveland context could look like. This was actually a proposal on East 89th Street about a year ago. The other things that could be, how could House 4 be, is currently our zoning code allows for single-family, 2-family, multifamily, and there's really no in-between here. And so what this is saying, House 4, if you have 4 units, you could have these things. You don't have to have these things. You would have to still fit in within the building envelope, the setbacks, things of that nature. So as you can see here, this is providing a variety of housing typologies at different housing price points that is really important as meeting that missing middle for our communities. The next section is Neighborhood 2.5. This was originally zoned at the beginning of our community meetings with the community as Neighborhood Flex, which allows up to 8 units and some small-scale retail. This now only allows up to 8 units, and it's around the park there, but no more than 2.5 stories. And so this area is currently zoned multifamily, and as you can see, the context on West 85th Street is a mix of single-family, two-family, three families, and there's some quadplex as well as eightplexes along these streets that we are proposing. There's currently zoned multifamily that we're proposing to allow for up to 8 units and no more than 2.5 stories. And so that could be anything, like I said. It doesn't have to be 8 units. It could be single family. It could be duplex. It could be a dwelling unit. It could be a townhouse. It could be a small apartment, but in no case, no more than 8 units per site. So here's another great example of the same project that I showed you on the far left corner here. Is that top corner is a home on East 89th Street that blends in with the homes, the larger scale homes there, that allows for 8 units. When you look at the front of this home, you would not realize that maybe it's 8 units, but in fact it has 8 units. And that layout on a parcel looks like the image you see in the middle here. So in context of a street, of a typical residential street that's 2-family, 3-family, or has some multifamily along it, this is how those 3-plexes or 4-plexes and the 8-plexes would sit within those individual parcels. And as you can notice, they are very much in scale and massing to the other homes that are already existing on that property. And this allows, again, for a variety of housing price points. So neighborhood flex, as you see here at the corner of Lake and at the Edgewater Bridge, and then also along Detroit. In the darker orange is neighborhood flex. Again, that allows for up to 8 units. The 3 represents the story, so those buildings can't be more than 3 stories high. But it allows for some light retail, so maybe an ice cream shop or a bookstore or a coffee shop or a yoga studio. And so that allows for that small retail services within the residential above. It allows for working from home and things of that nature. You still want those urban buildings pulled up to the street with some activated facades, so really making sure that you have that public safety covered by making sure that you have active fronts on the front and eyes on the street, and then parking in the rear, and then no more than 3 stories at this location. And this is just another example of what that might look like. And then the next section is in the light blue is the urban flex. That's the UX3. The current zoning here, where you see this highlighted, is a mix of general industry, semi-industry, resident industry, general retail, local retail, and multifamily. And what you see here on the bottom, it says opportunity area. When we were doing that visioning charrette, it was what the neighborhood had recognized as an area of opportunity. The vacancies were worried about high intensity, provide opportunity for more high intensity redevelopment along the corridor of Detroit. It was perceived as a dangerous area, meaning there's not a lot of people on the street, there's a lot of vacancy and underutilization, as well with the orchard here. And so when I say that this is very intentional, we went street by street, block by block, and looked at it for this Urban Flex 3 area, and really made sure, as you can see along this area of Detroit, it is already 3 stories, so we're requiring any future infill development to also be 3-story. And so this allows that variety of residential and mixed use. You want shop front buildings pulled up to the street with the activated facades, so windows, frequent entrances. It really gives an activated street frontage, but also gives visual interest for people that are walking in the neighborhood. And then this section here in the dark green is the Urban Node 5, and this is at the corner of Detroit and Lake, as well as near the end of West Boulevard here on Detroit. And so what is Urban Node 5? That allows for, it's a node of intensity for mixed use, so a good intersection, a point of mixed use buildings. It's more higher intensity in terms of the form. It allows for up to 5 stories, and really, again, those activated facades, that's going to keep coming up because the key is making sure that we have a more visual, interesting area to walk. We get residents out into the neighborhood, and we promote public safety. And so this area, this was the context in the olden days of this area prior to what it currently looks like. Just giving context, we took that context along with the visioning of the neighborhood during the visioning charrette week, as well as talking to various business owners about what they'd like to see here. So taking the former context, some of the existing context, and working with the neighborhood to arrive at the Urban Node 5 for this district. And so this is the current context here, and it's known as one of the most dangerous intersections in the city. And so when you start putting all of those regulations together, the setbacks, the streetscape, the amenities, you start to see what could this area look like for infill redevelopment. And so the consultant worked through that with the city as well as with the neighborhood and looking at how this intersection could change. So we could require the public amenity space here. This could be a plaza. We could change how this intersection work. It could be safer, not only for pedestrians and people, those that ride transit, but also any visitors that are going to the Edgewater Park neighborhood. And then when infill development came in, this is the form that it would follow under the regulations that we are proposing here today, and what that could look like. Again, this transition that we talked about before is requiring that anytime that you have a commercial building or commercial structure typology next to a lesser intensity use, that you would have this step down, again, away from the residential, pushing that height closer to the Detroit or Lake Avenue. The next section is industrial flex 3 to 5. I put 3 to 5 because that's either 3 stories, 4 stories, or 5 stories. So I don't repeat myself throughout this entire presentation in each of the various districts. But what that really looks like, giving you the intent of really this use of low industry that can coexist reasonably next to residents. And so north of Lake here, you have a high intensity use that is mostly zoned general industry or semi-industry, which is our higher intensity industrial uses. And currently it allows up to 115 feet all along here. We're reducing the height here either to 3 stories along West 76 here, across from Battery Park neighborhood. There was a lot of, when we started this, there was a lot of conversation around, can you bring that height down? So we brought that down to the 3 stories and then left the 7 stories in the higher industry areas here. And then again, this preserves the existing industrial. It allows residential, it allows makerspace, arts, and employment activities so that we can have jobs near our homes. And it reinforced the industrial character and history of the area. So this is the current overview of the site. In the far right here, where you can see all the townhouse and Battery Park development, we dropped the height along with these 2-family, 3-family homes that you have. Here, we dropped the height down to 3 stories max, so they don't overshadow or overcrowd those homes, and then left the main industrial areas of this site at 7 stories. And so when we did the visioning with the community, this was what the request was. They wanted to maintain industrial activity as needed. We wanted to preserve existing industrial character, create pedestrian and bike connectivity, extend a street network through the site so you have shorter blocks. It makes it more accessible. It makes it safer, not only for walking or access to the park, but also for residents alike. We want to design for mixed and flexible use for the future. And then there's potential makers and arts districts. So a good example here is you have the Shoreway and Good Company that's changed over, as well as on West 58th Street. Since the beginning of this project, it went from this old warehouse to having more windows and open facade, which just makes it feel safer as you're walking through this area. And again, this is just another example of what that could look like in this area where it's a 7-story or 5-story building permitted in this. So when we talk about the height, the current height here ranges from Edgewater down to Detroit to Lake is 115 feet. Going to 60 feet to 30 feet is a pretty broad height regulations as we currently have today. And what we're saying is let's bring this down to 7 stories, down to 5 stories and 3 stories. So in this section, it specifically will be between 7 stories or 87 feet and 39 feet or 3 stories max here. And so this is just kind of a visioning exercise of if this built out under the current regulations, what that would look like if we added more street networks and made the block safer. And this represents the different types of investment you could get here, as well as the development here, and what those buildings would look like under the proposed code today. So as you can see here, this is the existing on the left-hand side of the screen. It's a mix of 2-family, multifamily, general and local retail, as well as some heavy industry. And we're proposing to change it to lots that are more in context with the existing. And the H4 specifically, as it relates, there's only about 8 or 9 vacant lots still in that area south of Edgewater, and really making sure that by upping the zoning from 2 units to 4 units, the purpose of that was, 1, to reduce the nonconformities in the area, but also to maintain affordability, as we all know that they have one of the greatest assets in the city being immediately south of Edgewater. So the next map we're going to go to is the Huff Neighborhood Form-Based Code map, and I'm not going to go as extensively into the districts that are repeated here, but we'll talk about why they were chosen for this area. So this is the Huff neighborhood between East 55th to the north and East 90th. So this form-based code process really got kicked going. There was a lot of background documents and existing plans that existed. The pilot area was defined. So then the form-based code really started in the middle of this process in terms of assessing the existing conditions with site visits, with bike and walking tours. There was a hands-on workshop with the community, and then that week-long charrette turned on to Zoom because of COVID-19. So we did get our site visits in right before the pandemic hit here, and everything moved online. There were character maps created, and then we codified around those regulations. So because we moved online because of COVID-19, there was an interactive map that was on our website for over a year, as well as a neighborhood visioning exercise in which the neighborhood could come and put out what they wanted to see in their neighborhood, what were their concerns, what they really wanted to have here. And so that all of that was taken into consideration when we developed the character areas, which really laid the foundation of this map and what that could look like in the future. So taking that visioning exercise plus existing plans plus walking the streets block by block and understanding the goals of this code and codifying for those. So the current zoning here is mostly multifamily or two-family. There's also some industry that no longer, historical industry, legacy industry that doesn't exist, and some very, very not much retail in this area, which decreases the opportunity for things like maybe a neighborhood coffee shop or things of that nature. So when we talk about infill housing, there's a lot of vacant properties in here. We're proposing on the north corner here where it's either two-family or multifamily to, again, be that house 4 scale that we walked through extensively. And then in the orange, you see the neighborhood 2.5. That's the neighborhood allows up to 8 units and no more than 2.5 stories. And then where you see the light pink, that's currently zoned mostly multifamily, but we're proposing the community scale, which is also considered multifamily, but no greater than 3 stories, making sure that it's in context with some of those existing homeowners that live in those areas. So when we think about neighborhood 2.5, again, this is showing the existing context. On the far left-hand side of the screen are those 90s areas, suburban-style homes that were built due to the area after the Huff riots and the history that goes in with those, and what could be proposed next to them that currently exist, as well as up to those 8 units. It could look similar in scale and massing, but provide for more units available. It also allows for, you could still have single-family houses, but you could have triplex, duplexes, townhouses, quadplexes, up to 8 units. Maybe you have a live-work unit, accessory dwelling unit, or you could have smaller pocket neighborhoods or multi-generational housing, so we can have some aging in place and be senior-friendly. And this is just kind of reinforcing what we talked about before and how that would look next to these larger homes where you would have the 8 units and how that would have to be built out. It wouldn't be like 8 individual units. It wouldn't fit on those parcels. You would have them within a larger structure that would fit within the context of the street. And then the multifamily here is the C3 that you see is in the light pink. And this really allows for a larger style apartment, so Lexington Commons. They're urban buildings pulled up to the street with activated facades. Again, making sure that where we put people, we put public safety and make sure that the frontage of these units are respecting the street and interacting with the public realm. And this allows for community flex. This is multi-residential mixed use. And this is along Chester, so north of Chester, between the East 79th and East 90th, allowing for this originally at the beginning, before we met back with the community here, was 3, 4, and 5, and we reduced all of this down to 4. When we went through the process back with the Planning Commission, when we got back together, there was a real discussion around, because Chester does not have addresses, how do we make this work, and where do we put our focus in terms of allowing for some light neighborhood retail in the area. And the consensus with the community as well as city planning was along Chester. It makes sense to have some residential along with mixed-use retail, also along Huff, along those corridors, and then those well-traveled north-south streets, so like East 65th, having more of that neighborhood retail aspect added to it. And so the community flex that you'll see is primarily residential, but it does have limited non-residential on the ground story and allows up to 4 stories here along Chester. And then the next section is the urban flex, and we went through this in the former map. But this is mostly along Huff that you see the urban flex and along East 65th, in which there's, again, the neighborhood retail, mixed use, residential, bring those buildings up to the street, activate those facades, the windows, the frontages, and put the parking in the rear so we don't have any vehicle, pedestrian impediments. And so what does that look like? This could look like something like this, but not necessarily. Or it could be something like this, in which you have some retail on the bottom and apartment units up front. And again, we have the transition, which is vital to this code, and making sure that our more intense uses or higher density does not affect the residential or less intense uses in the rear. And then urban node here is represented along East 65th. Again, this is, again, a node of activated facades, parking to the rear, and this is, again, what we talked about, the north-south corridors along, making sure that there's some retail options for the neighborhood, whether that's personal services, maybe it's a dental office, maybe it's a coffee shop or a yoga studio or a small gym, and then making sure that along Huff there was also some retail options as well on those east-west corridors. Again, the maximum height here would be 3 stories. So again, making sure that we're in context with the residents that fit into the interior of the neighborhood. And so this is what that mixed use shop front could look like with a 3-story height district maximum. And then the urban node 4, which you saw on the MLK site, allows for retail on the first floor. The urban node section does not allow residential on the front on the first story. And that's really requiring making sure that we have a proper amount of retail options or office options within the neighborhoods within walking distance of residents. And so some context of what that looks like already existing in our city is at Euclid and Mayfield. And so that is the Huff neighborhood, the Huff map that's being proposed. Again, this went through the extensive process in the beginning prior to me taking over the project in 2022. And then also the follow-up with the meetings with the community in the last year and a half. The next 2 maps that we're going to go through fairly quickly are the Opportunity Corridor and the Job Corps Zone. This is the first one that'll most likely seem very familiar to many people on this commission, on this committee, is that the East 79th along Opportunity Corridor. And looking at East 79th, there was a lot of planning put in place over the last 15 years that really developed this area of the form-based code. And as you may remember, I brought a map change before this body about 2 years ago when Opportunity Corridor first opened up and there was a lot of investment inquiries pulling in. We wanted to get this code, use our current tools to max the form-based code as much as possible. And so that's really treating East 79th as where, you know, people live and shop and work, and then treating the other areas of the area that's currently as legacy industry, as well as eds and meds, if you will. So along East 79th, there's a proposal for Urban Node 4. Again, you could think about the Fairfax Myers Market that went in, or something like the Bridge Street Market here, where you have the retail on the first floor with residential above, really substantial windows, high ground stories, really activating the front and making people comfortable walking in the neighborhood. And then the urban flex is in the lighter blue that you see here. And again, this is allowing that residential as well as very small scale retail in terms of square footage. And then in the great purple vast that you see there, that's zoned Urban Innovation Campus. And that's more of that suburban style, low-tech manufacturing, research and development, light industrial, really no residential in this area. And we went back and forth on whether that was a good thing. And after many, many plans and years of planning, you know, they really wanted that core spine between the 2 transit stations to really be the area where we concentrate people living and shopping, and then keeping the area along the corridor for places of employment and attracting employment. And so that's the Job Corps zone. The places that you see in green are actually zone park spaces. So as you can imagine, those are the least intense uses, and really preserving the park space across our cities in each of these districts. And then the last one is the Opportunity New Economy Zone. We worked with Fairfax and the planning, all of the planning involved in this area to really come up with a map that fits this location. And as you'll see here, you'll see some repeats here where you have the house scale district, you had the neighborhood 2.5, so again, up to 8 units. And then as you look at this map, you can see as you get further away from Opportunity Corridor to the west, you're getting more into your residential, your deep residential areas that still exist. So really buffering the corridor from your least intense uses of the single family, 2-family, 3-family here on all sides. And so then there's also the urban flex and then the urban node. And so the last district here that you see in the light pink is the urban innovation district. And again, this is allowing for that light, high-tech, pharmaceutical, residential, and upper stories, limited ground story retail. Again, making sure that we pull up these streets, making sure that these industrial uses look like they fit in within the context of our streets and make our streets more walkable. It's not just blank walls that people are walking towards, and then a maximum of 4 stories. And so as we wrap this up, there's been key questions that come from the community and council throughout all of this public engagement. Is what does this mean for my neighborhood and expedited development and affordable housing? And when we talk about expedited development and affordable housing, that doesn't mean there's no oversight over development projects that are coming through, because anything that's 20 units or 20,000 plus square feet is going to require additional review through city planning. Anything in a landmarks district is still going to require landmarks review. But what it does mean is that we set out a vision. We came up with what that vision looks like, and then we codified for it so there's predictability involved, so that when a project that we coded for comes through, it can go ahead and go through the process and not take 6 months to a year to 2 to 3 years to build. So single family, 2-family, or multifamily in our current code is very hard to build when we talk about accessory dwelling units and things of that nature. And the variety of housing typologies as it relates to minimum lot size, lot width, dwelling unit size, floor area ratio, and the one-size-fits-all setbacks. All of those require either multiple trips to various design review bodies, this body, or the Board of Zoning Appeals. And so what does this mean for my neighborhood and affordable housing? As I stated multiple times, it promotes not only a variety of housing buildings, housing types, but also a variety of housing price points, that missing middle that can be all-encompassing, and encourages gentle density. So what we see today is single family, 2-family, multifamily. What you see is 1 house, 2 house, as many houses as I can fit on this one parcel of land, regardless of the context of the street. And what we're saying here is that we're adding an opportunity for a single family, 2-family, 3-family, 4-family, up to 8 units before you get to that multifamily. So allowing a gentler increase in density across the city, which also opens the doors for a variety of housing types and housing affordability. We want predictability and transparency. We does not prohibit the smaller or more versatile forms of housing, so those ADUs, in-law suites. We have an aging population, so we want to make sure that our friends that are getting older can age in place. They don't have to leave their neighborhood, move to the suburbs or into senior housing. And then that we can have multi-generational housing. So as more people have different ways of living, whether that's co-living or things like that, to raise, to make ends meet and things like, we make that an option for our community. And then why should our residents want this? Because this takes that community vision and that engagement process early. Right now, what we happen to do is zoning generally happens as a reactionary measure. Somebody brings an idea to us and we're like, oh, how are we gonna make this work? And then we gotta go through an extensive zoning process, and then the community feels as though they weren't part of that process, and it's just this really toxic cycle, if you will. And so what this is saying is, hey, we'll go out to the community, we're gonna envision, we're gonna engage, and then we're gonna take those plans, we're gonna take the existing context, because we have a historical context, and we're gonna turn that into regulations and a code that makes sense. This gives access to citizen participation and and to the decision-making process. Its built form is directly related to public safety, so making sure that all our streets are safe, not only for vehicles, but most importantly, pedestrians, and making cities around our people rather than of cars. The built form encourages revitalization with more predictable and streamlined development process. That means that our residents and our business owners that participated in that process on the front end know what's coming because we codified for that. So it makes it predictable. It makes it easier to follow. And then when investment does come, it can go ahead through the process without a bunch of hiccups. It promotes affordable housing by promoting a variety of housing typologies. It helps small businesses, especially our low barrier to entry. So when we think about those with lower educations that really just want to make a living for themselves and turn their businesses into a dream, it gives them the opportunity to do that because it looks at the impact on the street rather than what they are actually doing and making sure that it's compatible with the residents. And then overall, it creates a more sustainable, environmentally healthy neighborhoods through proximity, so allowing all of the resources that we need within our city to be within a proximate walk of our residential homes. And so this works very well with the other initiatives that have come before this body as well as the council. When we think about the 15-minute city framework, do we have access to a grocery store, a doctor's office, a coffee shop, a gym, places to recreate and play, things of that nature, as well as with the complete and green streets, the tree commission, transit-oriented development, affordable housing and repair with the residents' first initiative and how the zoning will allow for more adaptive reuse and reducing those nonconformities. And then overall, it just promotes the health, equity, and sustainability as we better regulate our land and manage our land use resources. And so the last thing that you'll see on your legislation here that was requested is how are we going to measure this? So as you know, we've been editing our current zoning code for about 96 years, and this code is no different. This is a great product that we're putting here before you today, but at the end of the day, there's going to be a calibration period. There's going to be edits that need to be made once this passes as things come in, and one of those ways to measure that, we work with Councilwoman Spencer and her community as it relates to the metrics of how do we measure the success of this code, and I'm not sure if it's on your page, but essentially we will be providing a report every 6 months to show metrics of the application cycle time, so how quickly are permits coming through the system, the number and types of variances requested and issued, the number of dwelling units per project, the number and type of code or map amendments that come before you, the property tax changes over time, average sales price and transfer of properties, a summary of new building types, land uses, nonconformities. Oh, okay. You guys, I have the wrong version? I'm so sorry. Okay. Anyway, so that basically we will provide a report every 6 months concerning the implementation, limited to measures such as the cycle time, number of projects, number and types of variants requested and issued, number and type or code or map amendments, number of new housing units and dwelling units, property tax changes over time, property transfers, including average residential sales price and price square footage, property values, a number of new street trees, and a summary of new building types and listing of specific projects completed in the prior 6-month period. And so all of these things, we will be working with our urban analytics, as well as the variety of data sources that we have to provide basically some of the metrics surrounding this code. So lastly, I just want to finish is that this has been a long project and a long presentation. The presentation is not as long as the project itself, but what I do want to say is that since I took over this project in 2022, I wanted to make sure that before I brought it in front of you all that I truly understood the code and understood the implications of the code to our community, as I'm a strong believer that, all zoning codes have a place for everything. But in this instance, when we're talking about the goals of this code and creating a more healthier, safer, more sustainable, and more equitable community for all of Cleveland residents, including my own children, this is the step in the right direction. And I hope that today that you all can pass this the way it has been presented today. And with that, I have nothing else.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you, Mrs. Leonard. Thank you. Great job. Thorough as usual. All right. All right, Xavier, are you taking notes? I see you somewhere here. All right. But no, good. Thank you again for the presentation, very detailed. This department has done an extensive amount of external engagement with many folks across CDCs, residents, business owners, other stakeholders, and so forth. So, glad to see that community engagement work was put in. Again, everyone won't always agree, right? So there's some level of compromise that has to take place. And so I'm glad to see that many voices were heard and listened to a part of this process. We're going to pivot to our public comment portion of the meeting. We have a number of folks who have signed in to speak. If you are not called, that means that we know where you are in your comments or your position on this piece, if you're from a CDC or the county and so forth, all right? I really want to focus on the residents today and hear their concerns or questions. Again, for the folks who are making public comment, you will come up to the end of, you can come to this end of the table next to Mrs. Leonard. Mrs. Leonard, raise your hand again, all right? You'll speak directly into the microphone. You'll have 2 minutes to make your comment. We'll take your comment, and you can go back to your seat, and we will continue through the list of the commenters. All right. Well, we have you set up. We're going to first start with, is it Morgan Taggart? Come on up. You're the next contestant. My grandparents raised me. I watched Price is Right. So.
Good morning, Chair,
Good morning.
members of the committee. It's good to be with you.
Yes.
I'm a resident of 1350 West 89th Street and in the pilot area for Cudell Detroit Shoreway. I have 2 questions/concerns. First of all, I want to thank Chairman, my Councilwoman Jenny Spencer, who's hosted several meetings, as well as members of the Planning Commission, to really get resident feedback during this process. My questions are both kind of fall into 2 buckets. One is around community gardening and urban agriculture. I know we've been in conversation with Shannon Leonard and Adam Davenport about some of the changes. We put in a lot of work with City Council about 12 years ago to amend the residential code to accommodate all sorts of urban agriculture, farm stands, food justice initiatives in the city, became a national leader for it. And I'm just wanting to clarify that the old code will be in tandem with the form-based code together for a certain period of time, it sounds like, until it moves over to form-based code. I just don't want to lose the work that we did around improving access to healthy food in our neighborhoods to get lost in this process. Shall we do my second question?
Yes.
Okay. And then my second question is really trying to get a better understanding around affordability. So I live next to Battery Park. There's been a lot of market-based housing development in my neighborhood, and what I've seen is a change in my community in terms of residents becoming displaced because of the new market-based housing. I'm hearing that form-based code will increase affordable housing in my community, but I don't know how that actually happens, because what it seems to me is it's adding kind of gasoline on the market-based forces by making it easier to develop. So I'm kind of curious as to how that doesn't displace residents in the interim by pushing rental rates up, pushing housing prices up, pushing out kind of more working class, poor, vulnerable members of my community out of our neighborhood, who then might be able to come back in 15 to 20 years after the tax abatement expires. So I'm just not quite sure how the affordable housing piece works in my community, because market forces don't seem to take care of our most vulnerable and poor folks. So,
Got it. Thank you. Ms. Leonard, if you can you provide a quick response to the 2 questions, please? Thank you.
To the chair, to Ms. Taggart, thank you for your question. So first and foremost, for the urban agriculture, that section 337.25 will still remain. And in fact, it's another one of those sections in the code that we didn't have the resources or the funding to cover all of urban agriculture to replace what exists. So what exists currently will continue to exist. The only thing we changed in this code, as you may remember when we first started back into the public engagement, was that the selling of products from a farm stand was highly restricted to a certain amount of times, and we just omitted that. But that'll revert back to that 337.25. And if we were to replace the full zoning code with the form-based code, we would have to navigate around that urban agriculture, and we would include you and your community members for that. As it relates to affordability, you're right, around the Edgewater Park, which is one of the greatest assets in the city that the city has, that's public access to the waterfront. Affordability is top of mind. And this doesn't ease the restrictions on development. Development is still going to have the same restrictions that it has, but what it does allow is allow for more units, which more units allow for greater differences in price points, because if only single-family housing could go on those few parcels that you all have left, that's the market rate of those homes have gone significantly up from when we first started this project to today. And so the idea is that by adding the availability of more units or smaller units or maybe an accessory dwelling unit to homes, we can provide more affordable options for the residents that live, the working class residents that live in that neighborhood.
Thank you, Mrs. Leonard. Director?
May I add, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, single-family homes, as Shannon mentioned, is probably the most expensive type of housing because it takes a lot of land and fits one family. And I think the idea here is with missing middle housing as a typology is that if, you know, taking the same amount of land, you can be more efficient with adding more units, which drops then the overall cost per unit. And, you know, a lot of families have done this where perhaps they have a up and down or 3-unit house and they own it, they have the mortgage, but they're able to rent out the other units in order to basically help with their own cost of the mortgage. And people have been doing that for decades, and this is just another way. Should there be somebody who wants to rent out a unit to somebody but live in the same place on the first floor, or to have family members who are aging or even younger family members to be able to live together in the same structure but have different units. So I think, you know, there are many factors that go into affordability. Zoning is just one of them, and that's our intent here.
And we'll have a final response from Vice Chair of the Board, Mr. Fluker.
Yeah, I just, as a resource, I would want to point out that Cleveland Neighborhood Progress has started looking at the middle market rehabs to provide a more affordable option. So I would contact those guys.
Thank you, Mr. Fluker. Thank you, Mrs. Taggart. And staff, she has other staff from the planning department here if you want to talk further in detail about some of your questions, okay? Thank you. All right, next we have Michael Armstrong. Come on up. All right, Mr. Armstrong, 2 minutes as well.
All right,
Thank
good
you, sir.
morning. Thank you for having me here at the table for a couple of minutes. I live at 1286 West 89th Street in one of the pilot neighborhoods in Cadell, and just some brief comment and some questions will emerge. I just hope everyone on council has had the opportunity to read the 200-page proposal before you. And if you haven't read it, there's a lot in the details that are not discussed or talked about. Let's start with just a few of these since time is very short. Like section 3004.3 says no chain link fences are allowed except in an industrial flex district. Or another one, no wall or fence is allowed within any required drainage or utility easement. Now you understand how many backyard fences there are in Cleveland, and utility poles and utility lines. You're going to have a lot of angry constituents when they find out that they can't get a permit. And I know that the Planning Commission will say, well, you know, that's already what we do. But in my experience, that's not what we do. Also, there's a section in there about the following encroachments are permitted in the furniture zone, which is now which was the tree lawn, and that'll be subject to city approval. Such as landscaping. So what's going to be the approval process to do any landscaping on a tree lawn in front of a house? Do we have to get city approval? Is the city going to maintain it? What are the rules? How are they going to enforce this? And then, you know, you need to look at the allowed uses that they're in this proposed code. So, for example, on my street on the corner, West 89th Street in Desmond, one allowed use is by right, they could put in a restaurant and bar. you know, that's not really a good use. It's been residential for over 100 years. I know it's okay to make some changes, but come on. And, you know, given being by the lake, there's no parking or restrictions or requirements at all in this new code. And, you know, I don't want to see like cars being required everywhere either, but, you know, we're going from one extreme to another, and we need some oversight over that section too. I think that should be considered. There's also like pilot geographies. You talked about why you chose that. So this is going to put a spotlight on my neighborhood, given the gentrification going on nearby. So I don't think this is fair. I think you should also include other neighborhoods like Edgewater. Why don't you put in fourplexes there, or Clifton Baltic? Include that now. Let's spread it out. Gordon Square. So, and then just lastly, I just want to say this process has been going on a long time. It started in 2019. And then the Planning Commission said, we'll come back to you when we have a draft. And we had to fight in order to have them come back to us. They did this presentation, workshop for architects, investors, developers, et cetera, last June. And didn't invite the neighborhood. We had to fight for that. And then finally, when we got some community engagement in the fall, we listened to their proposal, made some suggestions. There were no changes made in their proposal at all. In fact, the map that you see before you today, they ignored all the suggestions and changes up till earlier this year, after the current round of the was not passed in the Planning Commission meeting last fall. So, you know, just lastly, I just say, I would just like to urge you to really look at the details of this, and I think we still need to listen to the community more and make more changes. There are just too many risks at this time,
Sure.
And in the end, we can maybe do something that works good for the entire community.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Armstrong. Mrs. Leonard, can you provide some feedback on a few of the points that Mr. Armstrong made?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Armstrong. Thank you for being here. So first and foremost, as it relates to the fences and the utility easements, the law requires that fences don't go into easements, and the requirement for that is due around that if, let's say there was a gas link in your backyard and there's an easement there, they are going to need to get to the utilities underneath your fence. And so your fence is going to come down, and that will be at the expense of the homeowner. That's no different today as it is yesterday. Do they exist along our utility easements? Yes. We're just saying any new construction of them would not permit that, and that's really to protect the homeowner, the property owner, for incurring that cost down the road. As it relates to the encroachment of landscaping or furniture zone, this was a big change that was made after the community meetings and we worked with the tree commission as well as our urban forester and the variety of people that have stakeholders into the streets and landscaping around our city, and made sure that in our H4, H3 house scale districts and the neighborhood districts that there is the furniture zone, the landscaping, your tree lawn in those districts for private property owners. There is that's not a furniture zone. You would keep the same context as the current street for infill development. And so that in that regard, any permits that come through would go through the technical review committee as it relates to making sure that people follow the code. So you won't see new encroachments into your tree lawn, if you will, outside of what is currently permitted. As it relates to a bar or restaurant at the end of West 89th Street toward the lake, that area of Lake Avenue is a mix of residential, but it's also a mix of light commercial, that neighborhood retail that we talked about. There's actually a bar that exists there now at I believe West 87th Street. And so any new bar or restaurant, if it's a bar that serves liquor, would still have to go through the liquor requirements of the city and state of Ohio. As it relates to parking, even though parking minimums are not required in this code, they still follow under the transit ordering development regulations that you all passed back either last fall, and requiring them to find other parking solutions and shared parking solutions throughout the city. And then as it relates to the spotlight and gentrification, the spotlight on this neighborhood is because of Edgewater. The Edgewater Park and the access to the park is a great amenity into the city. And so the zoning is not going to just shine the spotlight here as in on the other neighborhoods. Are people showing investment and interest in all of these neighborhoods that were chosen prior to the investment today? Yes. And we chose these neighborhoods to make sure that building permits were coming through. But the zoning alone is not the driving force of investment. Does investment come from better zoning practices? Yes. And yes, we would like to expand it across the city and improve the code in other ways. As it relates to the gentrification, any type of revitalization of our neighborhood cities is going to come with some gentrification, but it's not just zoning that's going to stop that. There's other policies throughout community development, whether that's tax abatement or whether that's housing policies or whether that's access to loans by minorities and things of that nature and mortgages. All of those things go into the equation of affordability. So zoning is not a one-size-fits-all, fix everything, but it is important that we get the zoning regulations together so that we can have better investment.
Thank you, Mrs. Leonard. Just, Mr. Armstrong, before you leave the table, can you share with me briefly some of the recommended changes that you all submitted to Planning Commission? I'm interested in those. What were those few? Do you,
I'd
do you
have to
recall
set
those?
forward you like a list of
Okay.
some of those things.
You have those?
I got it.
Okay.
So I can show you here on this map here. The only thing that we
The light
haven't-
doesn't work.
Huh?
The light. it
The
never-
light. So in the yellow part, the only thing that we have not changed that was requested upon us at this location is they would like us to leave this at a house 3 scale or a 2-family or a single family. And then around the park, they want us to drop that to a 3 or a 4. And the reason why we did not do so, as I walked through extensively, is that in this house where it's currently 2-family in the yellow, there are several variety of different types of units, but there's a lot of non-conforming structures in terms of typology and parcel size. And so because of the immediate proximity and the worries about gentrification and housing affordability, by allowing up to 4 units on there's about 12 vacant lots in this section still existing, understandably, is that making sure that any new development that comes in provides a variety of different housing typologies to maintain that affordability. Because again, these houses were probably around 80 to 90,000 back when this project first started, and now if you do a quick Zillow, you're looking at 300 to 500 grand per single-family house in this neighborhood.
Okay. Mr. Armstrong, can you get that information to Mr. Tytron in the back? Get his info and send those over. I
right,
still want to see those. But thank you, Mrs. Leonard. I appreciate that. All right. Thank you. All right. Next, we have, it looks like Rhonda Wynn. Rhonda Wynn from Lawnview. Rhonda Wynn. Okay, maybe not. Next, we have Lynette Stover. Yep. All right. Again, good morning.
Good morning. Okay, I put my notes in my phone, I apologize.
No problem.
I just had a couple of concerns. I won't mention affordability, that was already mentioned, but I do have some concerns about that, especially being a resident for over 50 years. I'm concerned about the taxes when I remain at this home. I do have a single-family home. When my kids moved out, I started making it more livable for me as I age to live on the one level, and I'm concerned about being able to afford taxes to remain there. That is one of the concerns. I do want to ask about, it was mentioned in the presentation up to along Chester Avenue, because that's where my home is near, about there being 3 or 4 story high, but in the presentation it mentioned 5-story high, and I just wanted to make sure that was only going to be 3 or 4. And it also spoke about setbacks from the street. But I'm concerned because I'm very close to Chester of a building being right at the back of my home. Is there going to be room for them to not back their business up to my house? That is a concern. My final concern, I saw in the presentation, I tried to purchase some additional land that was around my home, and I was given a lot of feedback that I could not purchase this land. And then I saw in the presentation that if something happens to your home and over 50% of that home, you cannot rebuild. But I'm not being allowed to purchase additional land behind my home. So if something happens, that I can rebuild and have the setbacks for the new requirements. That is very concerning to me. I was afforded, at some point, the city did allow me to buy a portion, but I had to pay for tree removal, I had to get it surveyed, and they only gave me a small portion of it. This is very concerning to me that if something happened by the act of God, I cannot rebuild on my own land. Those are my concerns.
Gotcha. Mr. Leonard, can you address the height, the setbacks up against Mrs. Stover yard and the rebuild issue, please?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Stover. So along here is the map of your, I believe you live in the Huff neighborhood. It only allows up to 3 stories, and the light pink and the dark pink is 4 stories. Anywhere that any of these properties abut just Chester, there has to be a substantial transition strip. So the setback that you're referring to is that at the base, there has to be at least a 10-foot setback on the ground story, and anything that's over 2.5 stories has to be set in an additional 10 feet if there is a building adjacent to you. One of the things about this code that this allows for the sites, but it doesn't require the consolidation of sites as long as you're not building a building over parcel lines. This allows for any type of structure that may be more commercial or higher intense than a single family use to be more closer to Chester and really buffer that with some really with some amenity space, as well as making sure that there's substantial screening and transition between your lower intensity use of a single family to anything that might be along Chester. The next thing that you had stated was this non-conforming clause. So the non-conforming clause, if you have a single family home and you live here in this area that's shaded pink or light pink, that's all zoned currently multifamily. If you have a single-family home in a multifamily district, you would be able to rebuild if more than 50% was destroyed by acts of God. As it is today, currently, you would be able to rebuild your single-family home, and then under the new code, the 50% clause does not exist because we're making all lots that are existing as of today legal, and so those lots will be grandfathered in.
May I clarify, Mr. Chairman? So under the existing code, it's very restrictive. So the existing code would not allow, for example, a non-conforming 2-family to be rebuilt. But what we're saying is the new proposed code would allow much more flexibility for that rebuilding to happen. But with your home, regardless, you'd be able to rebuild. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Stover. And planning staff is here if you want to talk a little bit more detail, for your nerves. I understand you have some staff here, and they can raise their hand. Xavier's in the back, and he can talk to you in detail.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
As well as Kim Scott,
That's right.
the neighborhood planner for this area.
Okay. That is all that we have who are residents who have signed in to make public comment or speak. For any residents who did not sign in to ask questions during the public comment period, zoning staff is here. You see the boards, catch them. Because I understand sometimes you may not want to come up to the table and talk publicly, but zoning staff is here, or planning staff is here to chat with you if you have questions about what is being proposed here today. All right, and we will go into deliberations by the council, and if there's anything that come up, we'll ask that staff member share that with us during this process. Okay, so catch a zoning staff I'm keep saying zoning because that's what we're doing. A planning staff representative, if you did not come to the table, but you still want to have a conversation, but you didn't want to talk publicly at the table. All right?
Council.
Thank you. Yes.
There's a few staff here that had reviews throughout the process that did not sign into public comment.
Okay.
But they would like to make a statement.
You want to make a statement?
Yes, if
Okay.
you're okay with it.
Do you need to make a statement, Director? Your staff?
This is actually a building and housing staff.
A building and housing staff. I thought you meant planning staff. No. All right, Mr. Vanover, come on. Well, the public comment portion is closed. Mr. Vanover is part of exactly. All right, we'll go into the public comment portion of the meeting is closed. We will now go to our Director Well, Commissioner Building and Housing, we'll pivot to council members for questions. Thank you. Mr. Vanover.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the rest of the council. And I will keep this brief. Tom Vanover, Chief Building Official and Ward 17 resident. My shop, as many of you know, is responsible for the receiving, reviewing, and issuing permits for development in the city. And with this council's help and assistance, we have had several initiatives of late to review that process, to make it more efficient, to make it more transparent, and to assist and find out, what are the issues with permitting in the city of Cleveland. What we do very well is always and never, right? We do those things very well. What we don't do well, what nobody does well, is maybe. What we found with our current zoning code that's been written over 96 years, there is a great deal of maybes. You can do this if you do this and that. So instead of reading like a cake recipe, it reads like JavaScript. And I will tell you, and there's been a lot of comment and conversation, and really good conversation, and the complexity of the presentation shows the time and attention to detail that was put into it. But I'm here to, from our perspective, it's actually simpler. Developers, big developers and house builders, and they're going to figure it out. They have the time, they have the resources, they have lawyers, they have architects, they have engineers, they have land council of their own. They're going to figure it out. Who can't figure it out is our residents and just the regular Joes that want to put an addition on the back of their home so they can age in place, only to find out that if they build it at the same location on their home, they have to go get a variance. Because we've written a lot over 96 years, we've written a lot of zoning regulations for what we think should be, and not a lot of consideration for what is. And we, as the planning staff has already explained, most of our lots are non-conforming. So if you want to do something to your home, once you're through any design review committee and then planning commission or landmarks or all of that, you still have to go to BZA to get a variance to do the thing. If you build what your neighbor has exactly, you can't do it because it's non-conforming. What this does is it eliminates not all, but most of the maybes, so that our citizens who, we have a saying at Building and Housing, we have the one-timers, the sometimers, and the all-the-timers, right? This assists the one-timers, that they're putting an investment into their home, and it's, can I do this thing? Read this short recipe, yes, I can do that thing. And it's going to eliminate everybody at this table, everybody that's not here today, everybody that's been here before you in my career with the city has at one time or another reached out to me about some problem with some permit somewhere. And it's always, I have to give the same answer. Well, maybe they can do that. This eliminates the maybes. We're encouraged by it. Those of you that know me know that I don't support change for the purpose of change, and I don't follow the next shiny thing. But this, there's a lot of work put into this, and this will finish a lot of work that's been started. We can talk about a walkable city. We can talk about, transit-based development. We can talk about a lot of these, age in place. But if we don't, we can do all of that on our property, the right-of-way and the infrastructure. But if we don't strategically address the private held property, it still doesn't work. So I thank this council for their support in reviewing and the consultant work that we've done, and I hope this passes so that we can get through these geographies and work systematically to get through the rest of the city.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Vanover. Thank you for your comments. You're right. We get calls, you get the calls, and we call you to say, hey, what's the problem? Residents are frustrated. They just want to add some additional to their house so that way they can age in place, and it just becomes a whole big issue that this staff, your staff, and everyone else has to join together to work through. So I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Thank you. You can stick around if you want any questions. All right. We're going to open it up to the committee for questions. We have Councilman Harsh, then we have McCormick on the list. All right, Councilman Harsh, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's an exciting day. This has been going on for a long time, and I'm genuinely excited to see how these pilots work. I do have some questions on the front end about the pilot itself, and I'll start with this through the chair to the director. How long do we think we're going to need this trial pilot before we can measure the success of these efforts? Is this a 6-month, a 1 year, a 2 year? What's our time frame to be able to gauge how this is working from your perspective?
To the chair, I would like to defer to Shannon and add any comments as needed.
Ms. Leonard?
To the chair, to the councilman. So obviously the metrics that we are proposing states every 6 months, but we have seen interest in the code, knowing that form-based codes across the country and across our own state have provided success in zoning reform as it relates to meeting those goals of clarity, affordability, and accessibility. And so I know that there is strong interest from the administration as well as a variety of your council colleagues that are interested in pursuing form-based code in their neighborhoods. And so once this is mapped, we will work to either expand the districts themselves as we do current regular map changes so that the house scale could be placed somewhere else in the city after a visioning process or a plan that's gone into effect, or working with our consultants that we currently have on call and the money that's been set aside to expand the form-based code to other areas of the city. So in terms of the success and the measurement of it as it relates to specifically in these pilots, obviously the first numbers we'll have a base number that we're working on now. We'll provide a report in 6 months, but there is interest across other areas of the city for areas that have been either recently planned or have planning processes underway in terms of adding this based on some of the knowledge around form-based code in other areas of our state.
So what I'm hearing through the chair is that you'll immediately want to start looking for new areas to expand form-based code. My question is, how long will it take to find out whether or not this is actually working the way it's intended to?
It'll take a couple months of permits coming in.
Months of permits? Okay.
And through the chair to the councilman, just to be clear, so the form-based code, I worked with the Form-Based Code Institute when I took on this project because like many, I was not fully aware of how the form-based code worked, even though I was working alongside my colleagues previously that had started this project. There should be an expectation of a calibration period, meaning that we're not going to get everything right. Just like our current zoning code, we've been measuring that success for 94 or 96 years and making edits. And zoning should be a living document, right? It has to change with the times based on the development needs and desires at the time. So there will be changes and amendments that will come back before this committee if this passes today.
Mr. Chair, I would, to Councilman Harsh, I think there's two things here. The one is you'll see the process improve right away. I mean, I think, but the outcomes, the metrics that we're tracking is going to take a little longer, as Shannon said. I just want to make the distinction. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, I guess most of my questions here, and I went back to one of the residents, I think two of the residents actually brought up affordability questions. And, you know, I would say to our residents that are here today, I don't know how many are left, but all new development by definition is market rate. Nobody builds anything that they then sell for a loss, right? And so the way we get affordable housing in America is by and large through supply and demand economics, by having more housing than the demand is, by having an excess of supply over demand. That means that some sector of the housing market becomes affordable because there's less demand for that sector. So the general theory is you build new construction housing and the people with means move into that, thus freeing up the units they used to live in, which then might actually drop in price because those owners have a harder time finding new residents for those units. So I'll use the west side. I worked for a decade in the stockyards, and the stockyards is the lowest income section of the west side of Cleveland. It's got the lowest rentals. When the stockyards started to fill up, stockyards seemed less affordable. If the stockyards stop filling up so quickly, the stockyards will become affordable again. And so a lot of affordability in our city is market pressure and supply and demand. And I do understand the general theory, and I'm a supporter of building new housing, and I've been pretty consistent on this because I do understand that theory. I have some concerns that I think that our residents are asking, though, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to ask the director or whoever wants to answer this. I have a street in Old Brooklyn called Natchez, and Natchez is almost entirely doubles. Natchez is like 85% doubles. And back when the doubles were built, the intention was that the owner lives on one floor and rents the other floor, and this makes that house more affordable for them. And Natchez is 100% rental now because investors have come in and said, oh, I can rent 2 units. I have this concern about the units, the modern version of this, which is the big unit on top with the basement apartment, which we built I saw a lot of these go up in Tremont 20 years ago. And my concern is that these will just turn into the doubles of the future. These will just turn into new investment properties where the investor says, oh, I've got 2 units that I can rent, and that these don't actually achieve any kind of owner occupancy. And my question through the chair to the director for that, and I'm going to spend a little time on this subject, how do we encourage owner occupancy in areas that allow multi-units on the same parcel, long-term?
It's a great set of questions. I'll begin and then let my colleagues fill in as well. So zoning is not going to prevent out-of-state investors from purchasing properties. You know, policies like Residents First are out there for a reason, to begin to address some of those outstanding issues with the rentals that we see, with, you know, whether it's the lack of care for those properties, et cetera. But what it does do, going back to the non-conforming clause, is that if there's a property out there that is legal non-conforming, people are not going to have an easier time investing in that as an individual property owner, which means that it makes it open to more cash buyers, for example. And perhaps someone else can elaborate on this, but
I'm sorry, I did not understand that.
Sure, let's try again. So because there's a structure on a property that's legal non-conforming, as in it's an existing structure already there, but the setbacks don't match, the area doesn't match the zoning, going to the bank or getting insurance, you know, you have to show that your property fits the zoning. And maybe I'll defer to Shannon to elaborate on this one, because...
Yeah, so I can elaborate here. So we have a clause at the end of our zoning code called 359. It's the non-conforming clause. And how this works is essentially if more than 50% of destroyed by acts of God or whatever cause, then you cannot rebuild your property, whether that's if you're a triplex in a 2-family zone, or if you have other developmental standard issues as it relates to setbacks or things like that. So for instance, if you want to do infill development and you don't meet the setbacks, you either go get a variance or you need a map change. And so that's really important in terms of when we talk about investors in our neighborhoods and cash transfers. So to give you an example, every week I field phone calls about legal non-conforming structures. So let's say you're a triplex in a 2-family district and you call, if you're trying to get a traditional home mortgage, you generally can't get it from a traditional bank. Now, if you're a flipper, all you need to do is at least meet 25%. As long as you meet 25%, you can typically get a mortgage, because we know this is going to be a short-term quick loan and we're going to get our money back, at least minimally. But to put that in perspective, so if you have 3 units, you're expected 3 units of rent, and if you can't rebuild it by right back to 3 units, you're only going to be able to bring me 2 units. We're not going to lend to you. That's the traditional mortgage on it. But if you're a flipper, there are flip mortgage companies out there today that will hit it as long as you hit 10% or 20% on that rebuild, and they'll be fine. So what we have seen in a lot of these neighborhoods, or in fact most neighborhoods throughout the city of Cleveland, is the investors or the out-of-state investors, the LLCs, the cash transfers occurring, and it may be just even REIs where it's multiple cash purchasers from various countries under one property manager pouring into these homes. So, or they're just out of state, out of landlords. When you talk about how do we make sure that that all of these units don't become rental units, I think that's $1 million question, right? I think everybody across America and our major cities are trying to figure out how to attract home ownership. And one of the ways that you attract home ownership is by making sure that your neighborhoods are full of amenities. Make sure you have parks, dentists, doctor's office, coffee shops, access to the waterfront, things of those natures, public transportation, jobs. All of those things will attract good schools, public safety. All of those things are related and indirectly related to the built form. And so making sure that we promote that is of utmost importance to making sure that happens.
I'm told by the chair that I had less time than I thought I had.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So let me just hurry up and ask one last question, and then I guess we'll have to talk about this at length another time. In Old Brooklyn, 35,000 people, 2 massive single-family zones. The South Hills area, east of Broadview, is almost entirely single-family, and everything north of Memphis and the whole Brookside Reservation area is entirely single-family. Also, coincidentally, the most stable, highest property value, lowest crime. All the indicators of healthy, happy people are the highest in those areas. What is the form-based code version of a single-family zone?
There's not a single-family zone in the form-based code. There is the house scale, house 3 and house 4. It does allow for single-family homes by right.
But
it is not a standard.
But there is no version of form-based code that prevents a single-family home from being turned into a double.
That's correct.
Right.
Unless it meets the setbacks.
Right. And so, Mr. Chair, that is going to be an absolute problem with spreading form-based code to other parts of the city. I'm looking at where it's at, and I don't think there are single-family zones where the pilot is happening. But there would be, I think, widespread revolt in Old Brooklyn if you were to tell all the residents that their whole street could be turned into doubles and flipped to investment properties, and what was a 90% owner occupancy street would turn into a 50% owner occupancy street. That would be a problem for a different area of town than we're talking about.
Through the chair to the councilman. So first and foremost, to spread the form-based code across the city as a citywide, we would need a zone for everything. So this code does not touch every use in the city. And so before it gets spread across the entire city and in all districts, including your single-family zones, we would need to expand the zoning code to meet the demands of all things in the city. So for another instance, auto-oriented uses are not permitted in these corridor districts, and that would be something that needs to be addressed, because there is a place in the city of Cleveland for mechanics, gas stations.
I was going to ask
about
that because I noticed so is adult self-storage and heavy industrials.
All of those self-storage, all of those things are things that were not addressed in this pilot, that if this was to be expanded across the city, those things would be added.
So through the chair, this version of form-based code is tailored specifically to these 4 pilot areas, and these are the tools that you want to implement in these specific areas as the pilot. This isn't the end-all, be-all of all form-based code options available to the city. Correct.
That's correct.
That's good to know.
Mr. Chair, may I also add very quick.
If that was my
very
time,
quick.
I got in.
Very quick. So I will add, first of all, anything that happens to a home, an existing home, would have to go through building and housing to make sure that it meets building code. So, we're not going to just randomly chop up homes if they're not going to have the appropriate building code requirements. I think secondly, there might be single-family homeowners who want the carriage house, the accessory dwelling unit, and that is part of the adding a unit, right? Sure, but the flexibility is that we're saying that's legal, right? And then that you don't have to go the extra step. So.
But that begs a big question. The question is, if we allow by right properties to be turned from 2 units to 3 units, or 2 units to 4 units, or 1 unit to 4 unit, then we are going to invite, by market force, more investors into our city to purchase properties and turn into more rentals. There's already a national problem of people investing in single-family housing to control the market, right? There's fewer and fewer houses available for people that want to buy their own properties. But if you were to take a thriving neighborhood and say, hey, investors, it's open season, you can now buy all these houses and convert them into doubles and get double rent, right? That's going to happen. That will absolutely happen. And to Commissioner Vanover's point, they've got the lawyers, they've got the engineers, they've got the architects, they know how to do this. They already know how to handle this stuff. And they will just move in and start buying the properties and flipping them into investment properties. And that would be a massive problem.
Mr. Fluker, then we're going to move on to Councilman McCormick.
I just wanted to say that our sister cities are causing this to happen. Cincinnati, 15 years ago, when I did a development there, they started exactly where we are today. And now almost entirely, entire city is looking at that. I think one thing we need to understand, the operative word is pilot.
Yeah, sure.
And we're going to learn. You know, there's no perfection in what we do. The profession comes in is if we continue to tweak and address the changes that we see in the market. And I agree with you. We just have to keep our eyes on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to time myself, hold myself accountable as well.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Alrighty. Thank you, Chair. Briefly, I want to thank everyone at the table here today. Mr. Fluker, my former colleague, Director Shannon, everyone that's been a part of this. I know that your team has worked really, really hard on this. So congratulations to getting to this point. Chair, I think one of the most important things about this conversation, and we've talked about this for a long time, and we piloted this in Ward 3 in a sense because there are parts of Ward 3 that we have proactively rezoned that was supported by the neighborhood. And when a developer came through and wanted to do more, we told them no. And we said, no, we already had this conversation with the neighborhood. This is what we want to do. And that held, which was really, really good to see. And not everyone was happy about that. But there was a project that wanted to go above and beyond our proactive zoning that we did, that we agreed upon with the neighborhood. And it didn't happen because we said, no, this is what the neighborhood wants. A lot of other investment happened. People built homes and even apartment buildings. But the zoning stood and the neighborhood was able to see that what we agreed upon stood. And I think that that's really important in this conversation. Chair, representing one of the wards in the city that has probably seen some of the most investment, the amount of confusion, anger, neighbor versus neighbor, dispute about our zoning, that our zoning code has, our current zoning code has fueled, has been extremely damaging. And that has shown up at the Board of Zoning Appeals, that has shown up at the Planning Commission. So the idea of engaging the community proactively to say, what do you want to see here? Not let's wait until a development comes through or let's wait until there's an investment, but what do you want to see proactively in your neighborhood? We've already seen that work, not perfectly, but I think about parts of Duck Island where we created a plan and we zoned to it. And the neighborhood had the predictability to say, this is what we agreed upon, and the projects that are going to come in the future will have to fit with what we agreed upon, and that has in general worked. Not everyone's happy about everything. That's life. But in general, that has worked. So I really think it's important, Chair, to put the process up front. We had a house on 29th Street that burned down, and someone came through. They wanted to build on the exact same footprint. It needed 5 variances. That's ridiculous. And the neighbors around it are saying, what are you doing that you need variances? Well, the answer was nothing different from what was already there historically, but because our code is so bad, it confused the whole neighborhood. Why does this person need 5 legal variances to build a house that was on the same footprint as the house that was there for 100 years? And the answer was they're doing nothing wrong, but the code is so bad, it confused the whole neighborhood. Because all these residents got non-conformance notices. And what are you building there? Well, they were building a single-family home on the same footprint, but because the code was so bad, it didn't reflect it. So I just wanted to put that out there. Chair, to the director, I understand that this is a pilot. I hope, though, that we're looking to run a proactive city across the entire city, a proactive process, because I think our residents deserve to be in the driver's seat when it comes to the future form of our neighborhoods. This is a great tool to do it, Director. I've told you this a million times. So I do hope that we look at scaling this across the city. Couple quick questions, Director, in my rapid fire, 1 minute and 23 seconds. Is our electric car charging facilities considered in when we're thinking about parking?
That is going to be a Shannon answer.
Electric car charging, is that considered in this code or maybe will be?
Yes, it's required.
Lovely. 32 feet for a single family house. What I don't want to see is someone that wants to build 35 feet and having to go, so is 32 feet enough for a single-family home?
So in these districts, there is an administrative modification up to either 5% or 10%. So that'll
Okay.
allow us to get to
Because
that.
I know new single-family homes have been built, and the folks want to build a little bit higher, or maybe they want to build a roof deck or something like that. I just don't want that. I want to flag that. I don't want that to catch. There should be nothing needed to build a single-family house in this city.
That's correct.
Like nothing. You should just be able to like get a review and build it, right? I mean, single-family, for me,
Yes.
I don't think you should need variances for single-family homes or anything like that. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. And then my last thing that I want to bring up in my 16 seconds is garage placement. So I understand the interest in setting a garage back from the street. What I'm concerned about is eating into people's green space on their property. So one thing I want to flag for consideration is, are we able to have garages closer to the street if it means that resident will be afforded more green space on their property? So that's the last thing, Chairman.
Yeah, through the chair to the council member. That's correct. So there is an administrative modification that allows, if it goes to the technical review committee, as long as they meet the other sidewalks and all those other encroachment or issues potentially, to allow them to have more amenity or green space on their yard.
All right. Thank you, Chair. And again, I want to thank everyone involved in this process. I know there's a lot of conversation that's going to continue.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair, for your leadership on this. And again, I think by putting the power proactively in the community's hands over the long term, people are going to see a lot of benefit in this. Thank you.
Councilwoman Spencer.
Thank you very much, Chairman Hairston, and thanks to everyone for the dialogue so far this morning. I really want to start by thanking my residents. The Cadell neighborhood is one of the 4 pilot areas, and this has been a long journey. There's been a lot of engagement. There have been a lot of great questions. I want to thank the planning staff for always being ready to answer those questions that have arisen, for coming back and doing additional community engagement when we indicated that not enough of the community had been touched. And I'll come back to my point to what Mr. Fluker said, though. This is a pilot, and I think that's important. I'll come back to that in a moment. But I really want to thank my residents for so diligently advocating for their community. And I also want to note that there was a little bit of confusion with this morning's hearing because of the time change. So I apologize for anyone who experienced that. I just want to speak for myself as the council member representing the Cadell neighborhood and this pilot area. For me, the core question has been the same from the beginning, and it remains the same now, which is, do the potential benefits of form-based code outweigh the potential risks? And more specifically for the Cadell pilot area, is form-based code more likely to tip the scales towards displacement or towards affordability? So my support for form-based code this morning has to do with that process that we all went through together, grounded in research, grounded in best practices from other cities, really diving deeply into those questions. And the intent with my vote is to support a process that will increase housing supply and affordability. And so those of you who know me know that affordability is, well, it's very well documented the need for it is very well documented in our community, and it's absolutely my passion. But I think because this is a pilot and this is a test of a new code in Cleveland, that is why the work on the amendment that Ms. Leonard read earlier is so important. And I know we're going to actually read it into the record in a little bit here, the amendment itself. But that's why working on that amendment was so important, because as we work through this pilot and observe how the community responds, how investment responds, we need to be able to measure and all be on the same page about what we're measuring. So including that amendment really increased my comfort with moving forward and including the Cadell neighborhood. So I also want to say that the community reserves the right going forward is as we observe the impacts and changes, the community can amend the map. It can amend, it can do a zoning map change, right, to adjust. So while this is moving forward today, presuming that the committee votes in favor, this is something that will continue to be monitored and can be changed over time in response to community need. So those are really the points I wanted to make. And when you're ready, Mr. Chair, I can make the amendment. I can hold until after other council members have commented or whatever you recommend. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, to Councilwoman Spencer, for the record, I'm pointing towards a photograph of I don't know how many white male councilmen who are sitting up there. That's not what society looks like today. You know, even at that time, I think it's 1903, women couldn't vote. So I have to believe what we're proposing here is a far cry better than what was proposed almost 100 years ago. And more importantly about affordability, we need to start thinking about how we reduce the cost to build affordable housing, because affordable housing is not affordable if it's too expensive to build. And we need to confront our state, legislature, and maybe relax some of the rules that exist that causes these things to be so much more difficult and more costly to put capital stack together to cause it to happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just one more point through you in response to Mr. Fluker. And as the director noted as well, zoning code changes alone will not do everything we need to do to get affordability. It is a piece of the puzzle. So I think we're all eyes wide open about that. There's a lot more we want and need to do to support missing middle housing, which is what I think this neighborhood needs. Thank you.
Councilwoman House Jones. Got you? Okay. Thank you. I appreciate you. That's right.
All right, no, thank you. To the chair, to the team here, and to all of the Ward 7 residents who have engaged in this process. This has definitely, jumping into it, and I also want to send a shout out to our city planner, Kim Scott. Kim Scott single-handedly is probably the most busiest city planner in the entire city. And she was one of the people when I came in, it was like, hey, I know it was a lot of things going on for Thornburg's Code. We have to go back out to engage with community members to talk. And so I really want to just, throw my hats off to her and Shannon and the team for coming out on multiple nights in spaces where community members could really dive into this, add their input. And as in the process of governing, some things we agree with, other things we don't agree with. But for a context, for me, I've been a bit alarmed, I will tell you, of like the rapid decrease in population, specifically in Ward 7. I don't think people realize how many people we have actually lost over the last census. It is nearing about 8,000 people. Exactly, right? And this is not just because of like land use, this is also because of COVID-19, right? In the state, it's a lot of things that are happening in our community. And to think that we cannot afford to have this level of rapid decline, we as a government have to actually work to figure out ways that we can not just stop those who are just going away, whether they are dying, and those who are choosing to move, but how do we truly attract a multi-generational, very diverse socioeconomic groups of people into our community, as well as helping our legacy residents to be able to age successfully here in our community, right? And I think it's really important for government to help be a part of that and not necessarily just say, oh no, we're not going to do it because we haven't done it any before. A lot of the things that we have in practice have not been getting us the results that we wanted, to ensuring that we have, which I think a truly mixed income community, right? What we've done is in certain pockets of Ward 7, what you will find is such a concentrated of poverty in one area, and then you have the concentration of those who have of more means in area, and there's those that have extremely high wealth in another area, but no one is integrated or, trying to work together. So I really just hope that as we go through this process, we can actually, in real ways, take in feedback from what we are hearing, acknowledging if there are some shortcomings to acknowledge them, and if there are things that are working to acknowledge those as well, and having the communications to effectively communicate with people. Again, the timing issue, we all know, things happen, but prayerfully, we will continue to engage with residents. But again, I do want to, I'm very appreciative for Ward 7 residents fully engaging in this process, and I hope we will continue on as we move forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilwoman Hollis Jones. Thank you for sticking to your time. Councilman Joe Jones.
Mr. Chairman, this was a lot to take in a short period of time. There's so much to go over. And I don't think that we have enough time to deal with all of the bits and parts and pieces. So, but I will say that I was impressed with the presentation. It was thorough. I listened to the very introductions of the presentation. And at some point, we were talking about redlining in the communities, and I would ask if the distinguished lady could elaborate that redlining that was going on and how this form-based code would not seek to do the same, that we have had some very serious economic discriminations. Mrs. Stephanie House Jones talked about her neighborhood and the rapid decline in population. And we've seen a lot of decline in population throughout the east side of the city of Cleveland, and we've seen a mass exodus and increased populations where investments have been made in the city of Cleveland, and we don't see those same kind of investments in the eastern side of the city of Cleveland on the same level of what is rapidly happening in other communities. So my question, Mr. Chairman, to the distinguished lady, can you explain how form-based codes would level the playing field as it relates to what we have seen in redlining in our neighborhoods, and how our neighborhoods, unfortunately in the city of Cleveland, and the city at one time having the distinction of being the second most segregated city in the United States of America.
And Councilman, just behind you, she put the map back up for you. Okay.
Through the chair to
For
the
everyone, rather.
Did you
Thank you.
say that again?
I said for everyone.
Yes,
Thank
for
you.
everyone. Through the chair to the councilman. So this map is these maps are important, and they really lay out the geography of land use and people within our city, and how if you look at them, we'll point out a couple things here, and how zoning through the years and politics and just general policies at the federal, local levels played into this. So redlining obviously was a way of not lending to certain areas and certain people in the city, and you can see that based on the whole map here on the left, as best desirable, declining giving each section, red being hazardous, meaning we don't want to lend here. And as you look at this often fell into the areas where the majority of our people of color, African Americans and others lived, or were even forced to live when they moved here from the Great Migration of the South before white flight, which actually led to white flight, if you will, out of Cleveland and other midtown cities in the Midwest, the Rust Belt, if you will. But if you look at our zoning map as of 2023, it's really interesting when you look at these two maps, is because the brown represents multifamily and the pink represents general retail. And we look at where all of our multifamily zone districts are, it's in the areas of our neighborhoods that are typically poorer and people of color, whereas we know on the far west side or the near west side, whereas our greater white populations or non-Hispanic populations, that yellow you see is predominantly single-family or two-family districts with very minimal, and purple and blue is industry. So where we see where most our African-American population and people of color and of poor means live is among industry and in multifamily districts, is directly correlated to the redlining map where we see hazardous or declining versus on the far west side that you see is majority, as we all know, primarily Caucasian or non-Hispanic. And it's also where the less of industry is. And so really that really speaks to the overall volumes of, how the city was built, how the city was formed through the years for the last 96 years, and the inequities that exist around that. When we talk about zoning for the future, and these maps that I'm presenting here today, we're less concerned about use and race in terms of when I talk about multifamily industry, single family, and saying, hey, we want a mix of uses, a mix of incomes, as Councilwoman House Jones had referred to, and people living side by side, but within proximity or walking distance to their jobs, to their amenities, whether that's your daily needs, grocery store, doctor's offices, recreation, things of that nature. And that's what this code really sets out to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Leonard. And looking at that, looking at form-based coding in the city of Cleveland, and there's a lot of reasons why we are unfortunately in the conditions we're in. We're in part is because of our Department of Housing and being able to hold accountable our businesses as well as our homeowners to keep their properties up. We haven't done a good job with that. And so that can increase the situation of lowering the values and causing people to move out of the city of Cleveland. Safety is another issue. So as we're talking about this, we still have to clear up some other areas here to make all this work together in connectivity. And, I talked about safety last night. It's a continuing issue. It's one of the reasons why people leave out of the city of Cleveland. And education. If we can't educate our young folks, if they're too afraid to go to the public schools and they're traumatized, families are going to move out of the city of Cleveland. So we could bake together the best plans and put them here at this table. We have to fundamentally walk and chew gum. Our housing department has continued to fail. I have buildings in my neighborhood that are still collapsed to this day. I can show you photos, and I've called several times about this. And this is something that goes over a span of 25 to 30 years. Same building and housing. So, we got a number of issues, but we ought to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. So let me ask you this question. If we're bringing in new development, how does this form-based code, for an example, and I'm going to give you an example of a shopping plaza that wanted to come in on East 142nd Street several years back, and they couldn't get to first base. They couldn't get their development off. So, and that's because they had this entire process, 2 entire years, before they could get into the door to do anything. So explain to me how this here will enhance the capacity, because when I talk to developers, they say it's easier to do business, for an example, in Columbus than it is to do in the city. The city, you have to go through all of this nonsense. So explain to me how we streamline the process, how we make it a rapid process by which developers can come in, people who want to purchase homes, people who want to develop and build homes. How does that work?
Mrs. Leonard, can you give the council a direct answer? So
Yes.
Because we have a hard stop at 11 o'clock, and I have one more person on the list. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you through the chair to the councilman. So this streamlines the process in terms of there will be an application, comes in, we'll check for completeness. If it's 5 or less units, it'll just be a zoning review. So single-family houses will go straight through to building permit review. 6 to 20 units, anything above 6 units or 5,000 square feet will go through a technical review committee. So that'll bring everybody that touches a permit to the table to review it for completeness, and then anything between 6 and 20 units is going to go straight on to building and housing for their building code permits. Anything over 20 units will get an additional review after it passes that technical review committee and move on to planning commission. What this does is it cuts out a plethora of meetings in terms of whether that's 6 design review meetings, or whether that is 6 landmarks meetings, or whether that is additionally the Board of Zoning Appeals, because the key would be to catch those variance requests in the beginning, and if there is variance requests, to mitigate those by either conforming to the code that we're hopefully passing today, or if it's an absolute hardship, they would end up at the Board of Zoning Appeals. But this would 100%, like Commissioner Fluker stated, would bring the permitting process into a streamline, and those will be the more immediate things that you would be able to witness in this process.
Thank you, Mrs. Leonard.
And how long
Councilman-
would that, how long would
Oh,
that
and then
take,
there's
Mr.
also-
Chairman? It won't take 2 years, will it?
No, there's deadline.
Timelines.
Yep, so if you look on the code in the administration section of 3006 or 7, there are timelines. So the moment the application comes in, the administrator has 10 days to do a completeness check. Once they submit a complete application, you have another 10 days. And then within a certain amount of time, they have to go through each of those reviews. So the timelines are set. Under our current code, zoning code, there is no timeline set. There is a policy in place, but there's no specific timeline per se.
And this form-based program that we put in place, is this a model from another city, or is this kind of like we've taken this and we've designed our own form-based code?
Through the chair to the councilman. So the form-based codes are becoming popular all across the country, and have been for a long time as streamlining permitting processes. But the real importance about them is that they're context sensitive. So while form-based codes may be in Cincinnati or New Orleans or Nashville, this form-based code that we're proposing today is a block-by-block walk, visits, site visits, and visioning engagement with residents and business owners in each of these pilot geographies, and turning them into codified regulations. So this would not be applicable in any other area or other city or state, because it's context specific to our neighborhoods.
So you're customizing it to each neighborhood?
As of today, yes.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I don't have any unreadiness. I want to commend the administration for putting this together. It's a thorough presentation, but there's still so much that needs to go through it. And want to know, Mr. Chairman, when will you get over to our neighborhood and start helping us with the planning process?
Mr. Director, I asked you to talk to the councilman directly.
Sure.
We need to move on.
Yep,
All
absolutely.
right, thank you, Councilman, for your questions. I appreciate you. Yes, we all want to know kind of how we intend to roll this out in other parts of the city, all right? Councilman Slife will close us out with his brief remarks, and then we're going to go to the amendment by Councilwoman Spencer.
I
Thank
talk
you.
fast. So this has come through Planning Commission a number of times, and I'm certainly supportive of the legislation. I also want to thank the city staff. As it relates to Councilman Harsh's question about single-family districts and how the design of it is tailored to these specific areas, I do want us to be thoughtful as this moves forward about single-family districts. There's data out there that essentially say that Cleveland's population decline at this point is attributable largely to children. It's families with children leaving the city, and I will offer my concern, not a criticism of anyone here, but a concern of kind of urban planning academia, is that it often the best practices seem to not take into account the needs of children and families. And I will say, my single family household of 4, number of people on the acreage meets the definition of kind of compact urban development. So I don't want us to be so eager to develop more units and not recognize that there's two ways to increase population. It's to increase the number of units, but it's also to attract and retain families. So I think that that's just something we need to remember and be thoughtful about it as we move forward. The other thing I just want to put out there is that, so the city of Cleveland was founded initially by people from New England. They brought with them their kind of New England town hall form of government, very local, very interested in input. And I think that you can see a lot of that in how Cleveland functions today. So when people talk about bureaucracy and things having to go forward to many commissions and design review and things, there's maybe an argument to that of like, well, that's just open, transparent government. That's letting people have a direct say in what happens in their community. Of course, we can and do take that too far very often. But I mention it because I think we have in place a culture of an expectation of, because of the number of variances that are needed and because of design review districts, that there is this very high level of engagement that's necessary from residents. And I wonder to what degree, as we reform and allow things to be more allowable by right, there's an awkwardness where people learn that that's maybe no longer the case. So the question is, in these areas, how will, like, what occurrences, for example, would need a zoning variance that would require that level of community input and allow people to feel like they still have a say and engagement in what's happening around their neighborhood, maybe in a less way that can be less obstructive than it has been, but in a way that's not letting people feel like we are removing the community process from neighborhood development.
Got you. Mrs. Leonard, we'll get a direct, brief response, and then we'll go to the amendment. Thank
To
you.
the chair, to the council member. That's a great question. So the goal here is to have this very strategic and a very large engagement process on the front end. So we're really regulating around a vision and a process that the community put together prior to it being codified in front of you all today. And so that is the goal, so that when new projects and new development comes through, that the community already knows what to expect in their neighborhood. I don't think it takes away from their voice. They will still have options for those larger projects. We'll be going before Planning Commission, and I believe the amendment that's about to be proposed will have us communicating with you all, council members, as it relates to making sure that you are aware of the new development that is coming through your wards.
Got it. Thank you. Councilman, you fine with that answer? All right, appreciate it. Councilwoman Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to offer an amendment.
Yes, please.
To insert a new Section 3 to read as follows. Section 3, that the city planning director shall provide all members of council a report every 6 months concerning the implementation and impact of the form-based code within each pilot area, comma, including, comma, but not limited to measures such as application cycle time, comma, number of projects, comma, the number and type of variances requested and issued, comma, number and type of code or map amendments, comma, number of new housing units and dwelling units per project, comma, property tax changes over time, comma, property transfers including average residential sales price and price per square foot, comma, property values and property value changes over time, comma, number of new street trees, comma, and a summary of new building types and listing of specific projects completed in the prior 6-month period. Before the approval of a permit for new construction in the 4 zoning districts in sections 3007.1.1 through 3007.1.4, comma, the director of the Planning Commission shall notify the council member of the ward where the new construction is located.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, motion and second. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you. The amendment passes. Listen to the residents and to those who came out to support or not so much support. Today, we thank you for your comments, your questions, your concerns. We hear you loud and clear. Again, this document can be changed at any point. If there are unintended consequences that arises from the implementation of this body will come back and address those issues accordingly. All right, and so we thank everyone for, again, their participation, their involvement to help get us to this point. So we thank you today. All right, seeing no further questions, ordinance number 347-2024 as amended stands approved. Thank you all.
Thank
all right,
you.
the council chambers are open for staff
Thank you.
and residents, so please exit this room, go over to the chambers, and staff will work with you.
I know.
lead work focusing on bail reform, consent decrees, and police recruitment, issues that know are critically important not only to the city of Cleveland, but also in other communities across America. National League of Cities is unique and so important because it brings leaders from big and small cities together to share ideas, best practices, and experiences to build better and safer municipalities. Our Cleveland City Council is proud to have a partnership with National League of Cities and bring new perspectives not only to Cleveland, but to